Our first speaker is Katie Hietala. She's with the New York Natural Heritage Program, and she's going to be talking to us about dark skies for fireflies. Katie?
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Not so. Do you want me to put on the microphone? Would that be better? I'm pretty loud, too, so that should help.
How's that?
Better? No. Okay. Hi, my name's Katie Hietala-Henschell. I'm a zoologist with the New York Natural Heritage Program. If anyone's unfamiliar with the Natural Heritage Program, we do rare animal, plant, and community surveys across the state. So today I'm going to talk about one of our projects. This is called the Dark Skies for Fireflies. It's a multi-year survey of lampyrids in New York State Parks. So here's an outline of what we're going to be going over today. I'm first going to talk about what fireflies are and go over their life cycle, show you some common flashing fireflies. So there's three different groups, three different genera that we have in New York State that are pretty commonly seen. So go over some of the similarities and differences between those. I'll touch on the importance of fireflies, tell you a little bit more about the project, the Dark Skies for Fireflies project, introduce a couple of species that could potentially occur on Long Island, and then show you some resources and show you also three really easy ways that you can help fireflies if you're interested. So fireflies and lightning bugs, those are both commonly used terms to describe these animals. They're interchangeable. They refer to the same group. They're neither flies nor bugs, though. They are beetles, so they fall into the order Coleoptera. They're all in the family Lampyridae. And it's actually a pretty diverse group, which maybe is not surprising because they're beetles, and beetles are famous for being diverse. But there's 20 genera in North America, and some of you might be surprised to learn that there's over 2,000 species worldwide. In North America, we have approximately 170, and in New York alone, we have approximately 40. And I'm saying approximate here because those numbers will likely change. There's a lot of new species being described. So just a couple years ago, I think it was 2021, a new species was described from the Adirondacks. And there's some taxonomy issues that are still being worked out. And so yeah, these numbers will change as we're filling in data gaps and understanding where some species occur. And in Long Island in particular, there's at least 12 species. That's likely an underestimate, but based on existing literature, we have a good idea of what's known from here, and then some of our surveys that we did last year, we were able to observe some. So that number will also likely change, but just to kind of give us a baseline. So here is a great illustration of the firefly life cycle. What we're looking at in the upper left-hand corner is Phytinus pyralis. So this is also known as the common eastern firefly or the Big Dipper firefly. This one's relatively common in yards. You probably have seen them. If you've gone out catching, this is probably the one that you're catching. And it's a good representative to kind of show you the life cycle. So you can see that the adult stage takes up just a fraction of the life cycle. They're only in this stage for about 3 to 4 weeks. And their primary goal is to mate and lay eggs. So the female, after mating, will lay her eggs. You can see in the picture in the upper right, they'll use leaf litter. They'll also use moss or moist soil. And then after about 1 to 3 weeks, those eggs will hatch into larvae. And they're really small. The eggs are about 1 millimeter. The larvae are like 2 millimeters, and they're just voracious predators. So you can see that the larval stage actually takes up the majority of the life cycle. So this illustration shows 1 to 2 years, but the further north you go, the longer it can take. So in New York, it can take up to 3 years for them to grow until they're ready to pupate. And then in the bottom left, you'll see a pupa. So a lot of the species pupate underground. They'll kind of create a soil chamber. In other groups, it's been described as an igloo. And then there's some groups that actually pupate on vegetation. So that is species specific, but more or less similar. So I don't know how well you can see that with the lighting, but Here are a couple of long exposure photos from some surveys we did at Thatcher State Park. So this is near Albany in the Capital Region. So all one night, just different sites. And I just wanted to point out that when you see fireflies flashing, how many people have seen fireflies flashing? Okay, great. I mean, we're in the east, so I hope so. That's great. But what you're seeing is you're seeing the male fireflies flashing around and giving a species-specific flash pattern. And the females, there's fewer females, and they're sitting lower in the vegetation or perched up on a blade of grass or sitting in the shrubs, maybe bordering a wetland. And she's just waiting and watching to see if she sees a flash pattern that she likes. And if she does, then she'll do a response flash to let him know that he can come closer, and then they can copulate. So the majority of a light show are males advertising that they're looking for a lady. So here are those three groups of flashing fireflies. I guess I should back up a little bit and say, actually I was gonna point this out in the life cycle slide, I forgot. So the eggs and the larvae are both bioluminescent, so they glow. But not all adults glow. So we have day-active dark fireflies that have lost their lantern, and then night-active flashing fireflies, which have kept their lantern and use that for communication. And those are the ones we're talking about today. We're not talking about the day-active dark ones. But so what we're looking at here, oh, that formatting jumped. We have Photinus, Pyractomina, and Photurus, and at first glance, they probably look very similar. But there are a few morphological differences and behavioral differences that you can use to get an individual to genus level relatively easily with a little bit of practice. Species can get a little trickier, but I thought it'd be fun to look at these three groups a little closer. So the first thing I'm going to point out is the pronotum, or the head shield. You can see that all of these photos, they have some combination of red, black, and yellow markings. So during the day, those are typical warning colors to warn any predators that they have some toxicity and they don't taste good. And then also, similar across the groups, I've circled the elytra here, so those are the wing covers, typically dark and bordered with yellow. So some of the differences. I'm sorry about the yellow, it's a little bit obnoxious, but it has a point. So species in the genus Photinus typically have a yellow-looking flash. They fly earlier in the evening. So the thought behind this is that because they're flying at dusk or twilight or shortly after sunset, their flashes are competing with vegetation and any green foliage, so that yellow helps provide a contrast so that they can find each other a little bit easier. When they're flying, the males will flash their species-specific flash pattern, but when you catch them in a net, they typically go dark and stop flashing. So they're a little more timid than some of the other groups. And as far as morphology, I'm just going to point out a couple things. I'm not going to go into all of the characteristics because we'd be here probably all day. We could talk about this a lot more, but they're generally small to medium, 6 to 15 millimeters. A lot of them are around ½ an inch, to give an example, and they're more flat-bodied. So I've circled the head shields again, and it's just to pretty much show you variation. The species in this group can have bars, black dots, or very little red, depending on the species. There's also a lot of variation within species. So this is just one more piece to the puzzle when you're trying to identify one. And then what I have circled here is the male firefly, the underside. So this is the lantern, or the light organ. In the males, it occupies the entire abdominal segments, the entire 6th and 7th abdominal segments, and in the female, it's reduced. And if you see a female with a lantern in this shape, you can be confident that it's in the genus Photinus, which is pretty cool. So here are a few images of the larva, of Photinus larvae. So they're predatory. They eat soft-bodied invertebrates, snails, slugs, earthworms, and they pupate underground or in rotting logs. So this is all one species. It's just showing you the progression as it goes through multiple instars. Pyractomina is our next group. You'll notice sorry, the color change is a little more obvious on the screen than the display here. But so they have more of an amber colored flash. They can start flashing earlier in the evening and continue late into the night when it's complete darkness. And they range in size from small to large, so as small as 7 millimeters up to 22 millimeters. And one characteristic that's unique to this genus is a keel on the pronotum, and that's essentially a raised ridge that runs down the head shield, which I'm hoping you can see there, but I'm not sure how it looks in the audience. And again, here's the male-female comparison. So I have the lantern or the light organ circled in the male, and then the female has a reduced organ, a light organ, and it's in a different location than that female in the Phytinus genus. So you can feel confident that you have a species in the Pyractomina genus. And here's a picture of a larva. This is actually one that we saw after the firefly surveys at Thatcher State Park. We had turned our headlamps off and we were hiking out, and we saw all these glowing bits just working around in the leaf litter and at the base of trees, and discovered Pyractomina larvae out on the hunt. So that was really exciting to see them for the first time. They are also predatory, but the larvae in this group are snail specialists. So if you look to the right, that's where the head is. And you can see that the front of the body tapers a little bit more, and that's so they can get up into snail shells and get their prey easier that way. And this is the group that pupates on tree trunks or other vegetation. And that's likely because the species in this group are wetland specialists. So those habitats often experience a lot of flooding. So the thought is they pupate above the water level or off the ground so that when they're in that pupal stage, they're immobile. They wouldn't be able to escape floodwaters or something like that. So it just kind of increases their chance of surviving. Baturus is our last group. So this group tends to have more of a greenish flash. They're active later in the evening. They also have a brighter flash when compared to the other two groups. And this green is just a really nice, bright contrast against a dark sky. So they don't have any of that vegetation or foliage to compete with. And this group is also unique because they're predatory. So the adult stage and the other two genera we just talked about are not known to really need to eat in the adult stage. They're primarily alive for a few weeks just for mating. They have been observed nectaring. In the lab, they will feed on apple slices, so they're not opposed to drinking up a little bit, but eating is not a big part of their behavior, whereas in Phyturus, they actually mimic the flash of other species to lure them in so that they can then consume them, and they acquire some of their toxins to pass on to their eggs. And this group, they're generally larger, medium to large, 10 to 20 millimeters, so they're getting close to an inch here. And they have noticeably longer legs. And this is probably because they're the predators of these different groups. And they've also been described as having hunched shoulders. And what I've circled here is the pronotum again. And these markings have been described as T's or arrows, and this really dark black arrow-looking shape with the red contrast is pretty unique to this group. There's a ton of variability within species, though, so you really need the described flash pattern to know what species you're working with. I have the male lantern circled again here, and the female looks quite similar, but I have two arrows here pointing out her reduced lantern. So true to the other females, she does have a reduced lantern. It's just surrounded by pale, non-luminous tissue. So that's pretty interesting that they're so different than their cousins, for lack of a better term. And this is the Phyturus larva right here. They've been described as predator scavengers, so they will eat soft-bodied invertebrates like the other groups, but they've also been documented eating fruit and berries. Lynn Foss did a study where she offered milkweed rhizomes, and they ate that. So I think they eat cat food in the lab. They'll eat anything. And they pupate underground or in rotting logs. I've also read that they pupate in clusters, and they can also hunt together too a little bit, so they kind of have a pack mentality. So hopefully you found that interesting. I think their life history is really interesting and very cool. Maybe if you're not an insect lover, maybe it wasn't so fun, so my apologies. But why do we care? There's a growing body of evidence that we're seeing insect declines in abundance and biodiversity across the world. I'm not going to read all these headlines. Maybe you've seen some of them. But we learned that fireflies are beetles, so they are not exempt from this trend, unfortunately. There's been a lot of anecdotal stories about seeing fewer fireflies than when you were younger. There's been a growing interest in trying to quantify that, so we actually have the data to give us an idea about what's going on. So in 2021, the IUCN Red List Firefly Specialist Group did conservation assessments for 80% of the firefly species in North America. And they found that 15% of the firefly species are threatened with some level of extinction. And this is a conservative estimate. It's probably closer to a third, they said in their paper, but they just didn't have the data to come out with that outcome. So, and I guess the other thing I was going to say, in the Red List assessment paper and also the extinction threats, they have identified what threats are contributing to the decline in certain species of fireflies, and those are habitat loss, light pollution, pesticide exposure, and climate change. And I'm not going to spend time on those topics here because there's a few recorded available presentations where the Xerces Society and Sarah Lewis really dive into these topics and share a lot of really good information. So they're recorded. I can help you find them if you want to watch those. But what I did want to point out was one of the groups or the categories that the IUCN Red List assessment uses, and it's data deficient. So that essentially means there's not enough data to do a conservation assessment for a species. And they found that over half of the species in the US and Canada were data deficient, and a quarter of the known species in New York were also data deficient. So that just really highlights the need for additional research. Which brings me to our project, the Dark Skies for Fireflies project. Because so little is known statewide about fireflies, this project has set out to identify fireflies in New York State Parks. We're using the Firefly Atlas protocol. So the Firefly Atlas is a new project. It's a citizen science project that's being coordinated by the Xerces Society. And so we're using the protocol they developed so that we can share our data with the Firefly Atlas, and that vice versa, any records of rare species that they get, they can share back with us. Our surveys are targeting rare or potentially at-risk species, so these are ones that were assessed by that Firefly Specialist Group as being endangered or threatened, or data deficient and likely threatened. So those are the ones we're targeting, but we're trying to quantify all the species that are present. We're collecting distribution data to try to fill in those data gaps with and understanding the full range of species. And then at the end of the project, we're hoping to calculate conservation status ranks, so S ranks for our focal taxa, and also then provide parks with specific recommendations for stewardship based on what species are present, what threats their individual parks are facing. And so what I want to spend some time doing is just walking through how we survey, and this is going to be a simplified version of it. I'm not going to work through the whole protocol, but if you want to talk more about it, I'm happy to carry on this conversation. So the first thing that we do is we select a site. A lot of the rare and declining species are habitat specialists, and they're not great flyers. So they're going to be found in their preferred habitat and not really outside of that. So that's number one. And then scouting your site is also really important because we're doing the work in the dark, and for anyone who does field work, you probably see some hazards that you don't want to come across unknowingly. So there's open water. If we're in a wetland, there could be streams with large rocks. This bottom right photo has downed logs. So yeah, you just want to have a good sense of where you're going. These are all pictures from different parks across New York where we've done firefly surveys. So the next thing we do is we collect the habitat data, which we've already selected, but we should describe it once we're there on the ground. Weather and environmental data is really important. Temperature, relative humidity, cloud cover, moon phase, all of these things can affect firefly activity. Wind is another one. And then we wait for fireflies. So if there aren't any fireflies, you would still record the data because 0 is important for quantifying survey effort. Luckily, we're pretty lucky in the East. We have a lot of different species of fireflies, and we have not done a survey yet where there haven't been any, so that's great. But if there are fireflies, then you want to collect information on the flash pattern. So all these males emit a species-specific flash pattern. This isn't all the data that we collect, but these 4 things will get you relatively close to the information that you need. So the first one is the number of flashes. Fireflies can emit a single flash, a double flash, a triple flash, or if it's 4 or more, it's typically described as a flash train. The duration of flash is really important. So some fireflies can emit like a 1/4 second really quick burst flash or a 2-second glow. So there's a range there. At the flash interval is that dark interval in between flashes, so that can help you narrow down your ID. And then color is another useful piece of the puzzle. It's a little bit tricky though because we all perceive color differently. So the younger you are, the more colors you can typically see, and we start losing some of that color discrepancy as we get older. And I wanted to spend just a little more time on this photo here and point out the different flash patterns that we can see. So what I have circled here is likely Photurus lucicrescens. Lynn Faust gave it the common name July comet, which is pretty accurate. If you are in the field and you see one, it looks just like a mini comet shoots over your head. It's pretty great. But it emits a 1 to 2 second crescendo flash, and it repeats every, I think, 5 to 6 seconds. So this is a long exposure picture. This male likely flashed and then just flew out of the frame. So that's why we're just seeing it the one time. And then this next flash in the bottom right corner. Oh, I also wanted to point out, does this look green to anyone? More green than yellow? Okay, so that would be our first. It looks a little more green, so that's our first indicator. It's in the Photurus genus. And this one in the bottom right, does it look more? Great, okay, more yellow. So that would be our first clue that it's in the Photinus genus. And it's likely Photinus consumellus, but there's a few closely related species. So this one you'd probably want a specimen to verify the actual species ID. But that species gives a flash train between 4 and 7 individual flashes. So what's circled here is one individual male firefly emitting 4 flashes. And they do that every 9 to 12 seconds. So flashed and then flew out of the frame. So that's why we're just seeing it this one time. And then behavior can also be helpful. So you can tell this one's flying pretty low to the ground, and that's characteristic of this species to fly at eye level or below in wetlands, which is the habitat that we're in. And I've circled this third flash pattern not to propose a species, but to mostly just say there's a third species present in the snapshot. You would definitely need to rely on some specific notes you've taken about timing to get at the species level. All right, so I'm getting close to 30 minutes, so I'm going to try to go quick through the last couple slides, but these surveys are really fun and also really challenging. Working at night presents a lot of challenges. I mentioned that light can disrupt firefly behavior and their characteristic flash pattern that you need to ID them, so we want to minimize the use of lights and or use red lights. You can see kind of the glow of my red light in that upper right-hand corner with the pyractomina larva. Flash patterns can be really challenging to describe accurately. There can be multiple species present at a site, like in that last image. You could be counting a flash, and then we try to also catch that individual, so we have that voucher that matches the flash pattern. So they could cross paths or fly into the bushes, and then you have to start over. I already mentioned disturbed behavior, so if you net one, Photinus and Pyractomina typically go dark, but Photurus, the predatory one, really starts flashing at you. They're pretty angry that you caught them. And then Photurus, they're known to mimic the flash pattern of other species, so that's why it's also important to get a voucher, because you can't always trust what you're seeing. Temperature seems like a funny challenge to be including for summer surveys, but Really important because the flashes are temperature dependent. So the warmer the temperature, the faster they'll flash. The colder the temperature, the slower they'll flash. So here are some of our preliminary results. This is a 3-year survey effort. We've only completed the first year. 2022, the green dots was our pilot year. We completed 4 surveys as we were just trying to practice the protocol. The dots in red, that was everything we completed last year. We did 18 surveys at 9 different parks. And then anything in blue and purple are areas. So all of these surveys are happening on state park properties. So those are ones that we've just identified as places that we'd potentially like to survey at. And again, this is a preliminary list. So we want to get all of our species identifications. Oh, is that 10 seconds? No, 10. Oh, because this was on during the intro. Sorry. Great, the opening remarks. Right, we want to get all our species determinations verified by experts because this is such a challenging group and pretty new to me and our program, so we're still learning a lot. But what you're looking at here is a species checklist of all the fireflies that could be found in New York. Anything highlighted in green are ones that we've seen or that we think we've seen so far in New York with our surveys. And then the dark green are ones that are known from Long Island and have been detected in our surveys, except for there's 4 up here that have a notation. So 2 of those are day-active species. Our surveys aren't targeting day-active species, but they are fireflies. So I included those there just so that you guys can see a list of which ones. And then 2 Phatura species that we haven't come across yet, but that we're hoping to. I also have the red list categories on there. So the ones that are ranked as least deficient or least concern are ones that are doing relatively well and there's no evidence of decline. So what I'd like to do next is introduce a few species that are not known from New York. So we're kind of pivoting, but could be here. This is the Bethany Beach firefly. Has anyone heard of the Bethany Beach firefly? Yeah, okay. So it was assessed by the Firefly Specialist Group as critically endangered. It's recently been petitioned to be listed as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. That's currently under review. And what I have to the right here is a species profile. So that was developed by the Xerces Society. They've identified focal taxa in their target regions and developed these really nice resources. So those are available online, and I'd recommend looking for those if you want more info. But, so this species is just known from Delaware and Maryland and was recently found in Virginia. It's a specialist of freshwater interdunal swale habitat. We have that habitat here on Long Island. Our ecologists have mapped high quality interdunal swale habitat, so we'll be targeting those specific areas, the ones that are in state parks this summer, looking for this species, hoping that we can expand the range, because I think we just don't know the full extent of it yet. The next 2 species that, again, are not yet known from New York, but could occur here are the salt marsh firefly and the keel-necked firefly. So these are both salt marsh specialists. And the salt marsh firefly was ranked as near threatened, and the keel-necked was ranked as, or assessed as endangered. So found in New Jersey, we have suitable habitat. There's a chance that it could also occur this far north. So we'll be doing some targeted surveys for these 2 species also. And the pictures to the left here are from Captree and Heckscher, and those were taken during some of our scouting efforts when we were doing surveys last year for other species. So we were just kind of always thinking about the next survey. So if I've inspired anyone to go out and do their own firefly survey, I would recommend going to fireflyatlas.org. They're doing a great job getting this citizen science project off the ground, and their website has a lot of great resources. They have training materials, they've recorded these training modules they did, and you can submit data on their website. And I think iNaturalist is a great platform, but when it comes to fireflies, you really need that flash pattern level of information to get to a species. So you have to kind of follow a protocol to get there. The other resource is firefly.org. So if you want to just learn more about fireflies and what you can do to help, I know they have specific recommendations on how to put firefly habitat in on your own property. That's just a great resource. And then here are two other resources that I highly recommend. So Sarah Lewis is a professor and researcher out of Tufts University, and she wrote Silent Sparks, and it's a great read. She kind of combines her own research and also really interesting stories, and you learn a lot, and it's a fun read. I've read it more than once, so would recommend Silent Sparks, and then Fireflies, Glowworms, and Lightning Bugs. That's written by Lynn Faust, and that's the first field guide for fireflies in the eastern US. So this is also a great one. She's got a beautiful fold-out diagram of different flash patterns, and then also at what temperature you should be seeing that flash pattern at. So it's a great resource. Thank you. And these are my last couple slides. We didn't talk about threats, but we did list them. So one of the biggest threats for fireflies and likely causing decline for some of the species is light pollution. So this is a photo that I took the other week. A lot of you will notice the snow. So fireflies aren't flying, obviously. But I took the photo at 11 p.m. So there was enough light pollution that I could get this clear of a photo without a flash, without a long exposure. But just with the sky glow, granted the clouds were really low because we had just had a storm, so that's probably exacerbated all the light pollution, but the street lights, the house lights, so all of these are going to impact any fireflies that are in this area and trying to communicate with each other. So turning off the lights is something that we can do, and it's super easy. Firefly.org has a lot of recommendations. I'm personally a proponent of motion detector lights. That way, if you're out there, the lights should be on for your safety, but if no one's out there, then we can turn the lights off so all of our nocturnal animals can have a little bit of an easier time. The next big threat is habitat loss and habitat degradation. So if you own any property or if you manage a property, you can create habitat for fireflies. I have this picture up here because we're all very busy. So, but we can create habitat by doing the minimal amount of work. So leaving leaves is great. That will help create moist conditions for larvae and their prey so they don't desiccate. If you do need to rake, maybe like rake it all to the back of your yard or a corner so that your yard is still tidy and your neighbors don't complain, but you know, bagging and moving leaves off site is probably removing a lot of any larvae you have at your site. And then the third big threat was pesticide exposure. So if you can, avoid the use of pesticides, broad spectrum insecticides that kill, you know, beetle grubs, Japanese beetle, all these things. Fireflies are beetles, so they will be negatively impacted by things that you spray in your yard. So if we can avoid the use of pesticides, then they'll have a chance to complete their life cycle. There's a lot of research that's still going on, and we need more information about how they're impacted, but the few studies have shown that they are negatively impacted. And this is my last slide, so thank you to New York State Parks for funding this project, and some of the park staff has helped with surveys, and then thank you to the Heritage staff who are doing the surveys and helping with data management. And that is all I have.
Okay, we have time for questions. If you have a question, please go to one of the aisle mics, and then you can recognize who you want to hear the question from.
Okay.
You mentioned it kind of quickly that you had collected some of the larvae because you saw them glowing. Do you have any idea why the larvae glow?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the eggs and the larvae glow because they're active at night, they're hunting at night, and so it's pretty much their night warning colors. It's to warn predators that they have some toxicity. And it's actually been shown that the glow, the lanterns first evolved in the larva, so it's more of a, it's a defensive, it's a signal to show that, you know, they shouldn't be eaten. And it wasn't until later that the adults evolved the use to use it as like a mating communication. So yeah, it's initially first to be just like a warning signal for predators.
Hi, I really loved your talk. And one thing you didn't mention though are the predators of fireflies. And I was interested to learn what they are and if global climate is having an impact on that.
If the global
The global warming, global climate change is having an impact on
on
the
on fireflies.
predators of the fireflies. I'd like that balance there if it's being changed in any way.
Right. Yeah, so they do have some predators. A lot of things actually won't eat fireflies. So they have a chemicals called lucibuphagins. I was hoping not to say that in front of everyone because it's a tongue twister. But a lot of spiders will spit them out, frogs will spit them out, bats won't eat them. So they have recognized that that light is toxic and tastes bad and can make them sick. That being said, there are some predators, so spiders are a big one. Orb weavers will eat them. Harvestmen are another group that will eat them. Parasitic flies will use them. So I don't know if I don't know if I have a good answer for how that is all being impacted by climate change. There's not data on that very specific relationship. But it's definitely changing habitats that they use. So any of our coastal species that are using these interdunal swales or salt marshes, you know, with sea level rise, their habitat is being lost, and they won't have anywhere to move to if, you know, the space behind it is developed and not continuous salt marsh or things like that. So yeah, climate change is more obvious in the habitat loss part of it, but
Thank
yeah.
you.
Okay, thanks, Katie.
Yeah.